since I played Fallout 3 years ago, the Fallout series has been one of my favorites. And like any long-running series, it's almost inevitable that there will be some low points in its history, which is why I thought it would be interesting to play that which is almost universally considered one of the worst moments in Fallout's history. If there's one thing the Fallout fandom could completely agree on, it's that Fallout Brotherhood of Steel sucked. But before I get into why that is, it's worth talking about how this game came to be. The game was developed by Interplay Entertainment without Black Isle Studios' input. While the developers' intentions were to make a game that could reasonably take place during the main Fallout timeline, they also wanted to make something very different. Namely, they wanted to shift away from the role-playing aspects and focused almost entirely on action-based gameplay. This is why they utilized Snowblind Studios' Snowblind engine for Brotherhood of Steel, which Interplay had previously contracted for the development of Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. And then in 2003, Snowblind Studios filed a lawsuit against Interplay, claiming that Interplay used the Snowblind engine without their consent for Brotherhood of Steel, as well as Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2 and the GameCube version of Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. This resulted in Interplay no longer being allowed to use the Snowblind engine for their future games. Eventually, Brotherhood of Steel was released in 2004, 2 months after shutting down Black Isle Studios and canceling their concept for Fallout 3, otherwise known as Fallout Van Buren. This closure, as well as the poor sales of Brotherhood of Steel, would result in even more financial and legal issues for Interplay, which would lead to them selling the Fallout IP to Bethesda Softworks in 2007. So for better or for worse, Brotherhood of Steel was the beginning of a turning point for the Fallout series. Now let's take a closer look as to why it was so universally reviled. In the year 2208, you're an initiate of the Brotherhood of Steel, and you've been sent to Carbon, Texas in order to find your fellow paladins in this town of degeneracy. Of course, nothing is ever simple in the wasteland, and you've just taken the first steps of a very perilous mission. It's not long until you're fighting your way through irradiated abominations and other unsavory characters. As I've said earlier, Brotherhood of Steel is much different from its predecessors, in that it's an action game that's very light on the RPG aspects. You've got a wide variety of weapons available to use, and lots of enemies to use them on, as well as plenty of armor to protect your squishy and crunchy parts. There's also lots of boxes to break and containers to open, which usually rewards you for going the extra mile to find and bust them open. While ammo isn't necessarily rare, it's often best to use it wisely, lest you find yourself in a sticky situation. As you complete missions and tear through enemies, you'll earn experience points, and your experience progress is indicated by a green bar right below your HP bar. When that bar is full, you'll level up, and you can choose from a variety of skills to upgrade your character. Though while they're called skills, they work more like the perks in other Fallout entries. So what exactly is the problem with this game? Well, simply and plainly, it just doesn't feel like a Fallout game. Now, I know that asking what makes something feel like a particular game can be contentious at the best of times, and I'm not even speaking strictly about Fallout, or even just video games in general. But I don't think many will disagree with me when I list what I consider to be essential to a Fallout game. I typically think of a complex role-building system for your character, a variety of skill checks, a cast of interesting and memorable characters, and an engaging story that can change depending on the choices you make. And Fallout Brotherhood of Steel has pretty much none of the above. Sure, on the surface it seems enough like a Fallout game. You've got the general post-apocalyptic setting, the dark humor, being able to blow up enemies into bloody chunks, and even some other Fallout elements being name-dropped. But all of that is strictly surface level. Specializing your character with certain skills as you level up is extremely limited, and you don't even have any special skills to assign. Characters are one-note and forgettable, and their most memorable aspects are whether or not they're enemies to your character. Although I will say that a few female characters have 2 particularly outstanding features each. As for skill checks in a dynamic story, those are completely non-existent, and the narrative is pretty much there as an excuse for you to kill stuff, without really going much beyond that. So it's a little surprised that Fallout fans didn't have a very warm reception to this game. Another aspect I noticed about the game is how hard it leaned into its edginess. I'm more than well aware that edge is an integral part of what makes Fallout what it is. You have violence, blood, and gore everywhere you look, among other horrors of the wasteland. There's also a good helping of dark humor to balance out the more grim elements of the game. And I wouldn't have it any other way, and it's one of the things that got me hooked in the first place. But while its edgy tone has been around since the beginning, Fallout has always been much more than just edge. Just as the series is about the cruel, unforgiving nature of a post-apocalyptic world, it's also just as much about humanity struggling to survive and rebuild from almost nothing, and the dark and edgy atmosphere is essential to the game's themes about humanity and survival. However, with the Brotherhood of Steel game, the Emptiness feels shallow, as though it only has a surface level of understanding of the grim tone of Fallout. We have violence, gore, and dark humor in spades as expected, but next to none of the themes about humanity struggling against these elements that define the nature of Fallout. The settiness is even present with the game's choice of soundtrack. You know how Fallout typically utilizes music from the mid-20th century for its soundtrack? Well, in Brotherhood of Steel, they decided to use contemporary metal bands such as Slipknot and Killswitch Engage to help set its tone. Granted, the soundtrack isn't bad, but again, it feels like it was chosen specifically to lean as hard as possible into the realm of edge. Meanwhile, the mid-20th century music usually used in Fallout games gives the atmosphere a melancholically nostalgic tone, representative of humanity's desire to go back to simpler and happier times before the war, even though most are well aware that such a thing could probably never happen. The soundtrack also gives a bit of irony as you're tearing your way through enemies while cheerful music plays. Again, there's also a bit of dark humor in this, and further defines the tone of Fallout. And all of this is lost in Brotherhood of Steel with its choice of music, and how it exchanges this somber irony for pure, unadulterated edge. And I reiterate, I do not think there's anything inherently wrong with metal music. I just don't think it was a good choice for Fallout. The thing is too, is that Brotherhood of Steel isn't an awful game as a whole. The graphics are fine, the voice acting is decent, and while the gameplay can get a bit repetitive at times, I admit I had my fun with it. But it's such a huge departure from what people know and love about Fallout that simply being a slightly above mediocre action game at best just isn't going to cut it. Really, regardless of what you think about the Bethesda-made Fallout games, hell, even regardless of what you think about Fallout 4, they all still feel more like what you'd expect from a Fallout experience. Also, I still like Fallout 4 quite a bit, and anyone that's got a problem with that can bite me. I'm also not saying that change is automatically bad, even dramatic changes to a long-running series. It could give something a much-needed breath of fresh air, and open up new opportunities for gameplay and storytelling. A good example of this is none other than Fallout New Vegas. Instead of an isometric turn-based RPG, it was a first-person RPG with real-time combat like Fallout 3. But while the gameplay was much more action-based than the original PC games, it still had the strong role-playing aspects and writing that was so synonymous with Fallout. All of this is why New Vegas is so well loved, at least nowadays after the rough patches were ironed out. And because Brotherhood of Steel's changes felt like a shallow imitation of everything that makes Fallout what it is, it was a lot less loved. And that is Brotherhood of Steel's legacy. It was so widely reviled that Bethesda officially declared it non-canon, something I think even the most critical of Fallout fans didn't have a problem with. In fact, it's almost impressive how Brotherhood of Steel managed to unify all Fallout fans in agreement that the game was easily the worst thing to happen to the series. Well, until a certain live service game entered the picture, but I digress. While it might be worth giving it a try for history's sake, you'll soon find out that Fallout BOS is just a POS. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to click like, and subscribe if you want to see more.